Okay, episode 3. We're reading La Chasse de Meteor, Chase of the Meteor or Meteor Hunt by Jules Verne, the French science fiction novelist. It's about a meteor made out of gold that strikes the earth. It's a lot like the situation we have with Bitcoin, which is digital gold. Here we are getting introduced to Mr. Forsyth and his assistant Omicron. This was a little fellow nicknamed Omicron, whose moniker might well have been Omega if he hadn't been such a pipsqueak. He hadn't grown a notch since he was 15, at which point he'd stood only 4 feet 6 inches high. His real name was Tom Whiff, and he'd been hired hand in the Forsyth home right from the time he'd stopped growing. Since he was now over 50, this means he'd been working for Francis's uncle for 35 years. But it is important to understand how Omicron's role had changed over time. He had evolved into Forsyth's assistant, helping him in his work with an intensity that easily matched his employer's. And what exactly was this work of Dean Forsyth's? He was an enthusiast, a man with great wild-eyed dreams, and you'll see for yourself. And what was his specific line of work? Doctor, lawyer, scientist, author, artist, businessman, like plenty of other folks in the land of the free. Not in so many words, but he did dabble in science, the particular science of astronomy, though he steered clear of the higher mathematics of heavenly bodies. Instead, he was exclusively interested in discovering new stars and planets. Almost nothing that happened on the surface of the globe had any appeal for him, and he spent his life in the infinite reaches of outer space. But since they didn't serve meals there, he had to come down to earth at least twice a day. And on this particular morning, he was keeping everybody waiting at the dining table, which made old Mrs. Mitz fret and fume. "Ain't he coming?" she repeated. "Omicron's with him, right?" Francis asked. Where his master is, he's never far off," the housekeeper answered, then added in her inimitable fashion, "But I ain't got the legs to climb up on their hangout and see." The hangout in question was an actual watchtower, an authentic observation deck whose top floor was some 20 feet above the roof of the house. The floor underneath was a circular room with 4 windows that faced the 4 points of the compass. Inside, some optical instruments were pivoting on the bases, binoculars and telescopes of pretty considerable range, and if their lenses were hopelessly worn down, it wasn't the fault of their users. A more pressing worry was the possibility that Forsyth and Omicron might wind up ruining their eyes from constantly rubbing them against the eyepieces of their instruments. This was the room where the two of them spent the better part of their days and nights, relieving each other, it's true, between going to bed and getting up and down. They peered, they examined, and they searched all over the galaxy. They were forever hoping to make some discovery that could be named after Dean Forsyth. Any time the skies were clear, they were at it again. But on the 37th parallel, which intersects the state of Virginia, the skies didn't always behave. They featured all the cirrus, nimbus, and cumulus clouds anybody could want, and definitively more than the master and his assistant did. So the two of them kept up a running crossfire of threats and cuss words against those inconsiderate winds that insisted on draping curtains of vapor across the firmament. And during all the endless, aggravating hours when nothing was visible, our amateur astronomer would scratch his scruffy head and say over and over, "For all I know, Some new star could be within reach of my lens right now. This could be my big chance to find a second moon circling the Earth, or some junior satellite orbiting the moon. Maybe there is a stray meteor out there, some shooting star or asteroid going by right behind the damn cloud cover. Absolutely, Omicron answered. And just this morning, boss, there was an opening in the clouds, and I thought I spotted it too, Omicron. We both did, boss. Both of us. I definitely saw it first, Forsyth insisted. No arguments, Omicron agreed, giving an approving nod. And I am almost certain that they had to be. I could have sworn, Forsyth insisted, that it was a meteor heading from northeast to southwest. Yes, boss, practically in the same direction as the sun. To all appearances, Omicron. Right. It went by at 7:37 and 20 seconds. 20 seconds, Omicron repeated. That's what the clock said. And it hasn't come back since. Forsyth snarled, shaking his fist at the sky. No, boss. And up in the west-southwest, nothing but clouds, clouds, clouds. I doubt if we'll see a square inch of blue the whole day. It's deliberate, Forsyth replied. It's a plot aimed specifically at me. Me too, Omicron muttered. He saw himself as full partner in his boss's enterprises. Needless to say, all other citizens of Boston had their own grounds for complaint whenever cloudy skies afflicted the town. Whether or not the sun shines, it's still everybody's business. And you can imagine the wildness of Dean Forsyth's mood when a fog settled over the area. A 48-hour fog, no less. Even under cloudy skies, it was still possible to spot some asteroid or other as it skimmed the surface of the planet Earth. But in one of these thick fogs with less than a 10-yard visibility, the strongest telescopes and latest model binoculars couldn't see across the room. And even though Boston is watered by the limpid waves of Potomac River, rather than the muddy currents of the Thames, the types of London pea soup is plenty common in these parts. But let's get down to the cases. When the skies had been clear early that morning, just what had Forsyth and his servants seen, or thought they'd seen? Oh, look at my reading. But let's get down to cases. When the skies had been clear early that morning, just what had Forsyth and his servants seen, or thought they'd seen? It was a shooting star with a long tail, and it was moving so fast they couldn't gauge its brightness. What's more, as we've already heard, this meteor was heading from the northeast to the southwest. But since it had to be moving at a well-defined distance from the Earth, should have been possible to train a telescope on it for a good while, if that ill-timed fog hadn't gotten so thoroughly in the way. And since then, naturally, this bad luck did nothing but provoke complaints. Would that shooting star put in another appearance in Boston's horizon? Would they be able to figure out its components, determine its mass, its weight, and its makeup? Would some other astronomer have better luck and find it somewhere else in the sky? Since Dean Forsyth had seen it in his telescope for only a short time, would he still qualify to name the discovery after himself? Or would all the glory go later to one of those experts in Europe or America who spend their whole lives studying meteors, professionals who can scour the skies top to bottom from their observatories? The two men went back to the windows facing east. They didn't say a word. Forsyth scanned the vast horizon bounded on one side by the jagged outline of the Surber Hills, and over which the wind was picking up, busily driving piles of grey clouds that left only a few skimpy openings here and there. Given its subnormal height, Omicron had to stand on tiptoe to get a better view. Forsyth folded his arms tightly over his chest, fists clenched. The other man beat a nervous tattoo on the windowsill. A few squawking birds fluttered past, as if jeering at Forsyth and his assistant for being earthbound humans. Oh, if only they could soar into the skies along with those birds. Couldn't they fly through that cloud layer and maybe see that asteroid again as it continued on its way in the bright sunlight? Just then there was a knock at the door. Wrapped up in their thoughts, Dean Forsyth and Omicron didn't hear it. The door opened and Francis Gordon stood on the threshold. Forsyth and Omicron didn't even turn round. Francis went over to his uncle and tapped him on the arm. Forsyth seemed to come back from some place not of this earth, but out in space, where his imagination had taken him in hot pursuit of the meteor. "What?" he asked. "Uncle, lunch is waiting." "Oh, is it?" Forsyth put in. "Well, so are we." "You? What do you mean?" "We're waiting for the sun to come back out," Omicron explained. I should have said that with Omicron's voice. "We're waiting for the sun to come back out," Omicron explained. And his master nodded in agreement. "But I don't believe you have invited the sun to lunch, Uncle, so we can dig in without him." It was hard to dispute this, since Old Sol was staying away all day. Why couldn't Forsyth unbend and have lunch along with the rest of the planet? "Uncle," Francis continued, "Mrs. Mitz is getting her dander up. Now I'm afraid she—" This was a compelling argument, and he yanked Forsyth from Fantasyland back into reality. He knew and feared his housekeeper's temper, and this summons from her called for instant obedience. "What time is it?" he asked. 11:46, Francis replied. And 11:46 is what the clock said too, whereas Forsyth and his nephew usually sat down to lunch at 11 o'clock on the dot. Normally his assistant Omicron would have eaten along with them, but that day Forsyth expressly ordered him to stay behind the observation deck in case the sun came out again. Forsyth and Gordon headed for the stairs and descended to the ground floor. Where Mrs. Mitz was, she glared at her boss, who hung his head. "What happened to Omicron?" she demanded. "He's busy upstairs," Francis answered. "We'll have to do without him this morning." "Whatever," Mrs. Mitz replied. Lunch got underway, and the mouths ate but didn't talk. Mrs. Mitz usually kept up a constant chatter while bringing in each course and exchanging the plates, but that day her teeth stayed clenched. The silence was heavy, the tension unrelenting. Trying to put an end to this, Francis said, "Well, Uncle, did you get in a decent morning's work?" "Yes and no," Forsyth answered. "The weather didn't cooperate." "You're on the verge of some big discovery out in space." "I think so, Francis. However, I can't be certain without seeing it again." "But is it worth stewing about all week?" Mrs. Mitz inquired caustically. "You spend your whole life in your tower and you get up in the wee hours. Yes, I heard you 3 times last night." "Actually, my dear Mrs. Mitz—" "Then, when you drop from exhaustion," the old housekeeper went on, "when your health goes back, when you catch your death of cold, when you're stuck in bed for weeks on end, are your stars going to come down and cure you? Is the doctor going to prescribe you a bottle of to take instead of pills?" Whenever the conversation descended to this level, Forsyth knew it was hopeless to talk back. He hated Mrs. Mitz's reprimands, but he didn't want to set her off by arguing with her. He meekly returned to his meal and promptly tried to eat from his glass and drink from his plate. Francis Gordon made an attempt to keep the conversation going, but he was talking to the walls. His uncle wore a dreary expression and seemed to be shutting him out. But when all else fails, people talk about the weather. Whether today's or tomorrow's. It's an index sorry, it's an inexhaustible topic that always works, and in fact the weather was exactly the issue that had Forsyth on the tenterhooks. So at a particular moment, when the cloud cover had left the dining room even darker, he raised his head, looked out the window, wearily put down his fork, and exclaimed, "How long is that damn sky going to stay cloudy? Why can't it rain? Get it over with." "I'll say," Miss Smith stated, "we've had a dry spell for 3 whole weeks, so the ground could sure use it." "The ground," Fawcett muttered, so scornfully that his old housekeeper was off and running again. "That's right, the ground. It's as good a place as the sky keep your head stuck in, even in lunchtime." Okay, Mrs. Mitz," Francis said, trying to soothe her. "Besides," she kept on in the same tone of voice, "if it ain't allowed to rain the first week of April, when the heck can it? When the heck can it?" "She's right, Uncle," Francis continued. "This is early April. It's the start of the spring, and that's the way things are. But spring weather isn't always bad. When the cold lets up, there are dry spells and clear skies, just like in midsummer. So conditions will get better, and you will get back to work. Be patient, Uncle." "Patient," Fawcett responded, his face as dismal as the sky. "How can I be patient at a time like this? What if it goes so far away that we can't see it? What if it never shows up on the horizon again?" "It?" Mrs. Mitz exclaimed. "What's this it you're yammering about?" Just then Omicron's voice rang out. Boss! What?" Forsyth exclaimed, leaping from his chair and heading for the door. And sure enough, a ray of sunshine had come through the window, highlighting the glasses, bottles, and pitchers on the table. It's the sun, Forsyth repeated, dashing up the stairs. "Off he goes again," Mrs. Mitz said, sinking down on a chair. "Is that right, I ask you? He spends all day and all night in a chilly springtime air. He could come down with a cold congestion bronchitis, and all because of his falling stars. Does he think he can catch one and stick it in a glass case?" Old Mrs. Mitz went on, though her employer didn't hear her, and wouldn't have listened if he could. Panting from his dash up the stairs, Dean Forsyth headed for the observation deck. The wind had picked up from the southwest and driven the clouds eastward. Directly overhead, a white patch of blue. Directly overhead, a white patch of blue was shown through. A good part of the sky where they'd seen the meteor was now clear, allowing the instruments to follow its path without any interferences. Sunlight bathed the room. "Well," Forsyth asked, "what's going on?" "The sun is out," Omicron answered, "but not for long because the clouds are already back in the west." "There's no time to lose," Forsyth exclaimed, aiming his telescope while his assistant did the same with his spyglass. For some 40 minutes they maneuvered their instruments with intense dedication. How patiently they adjusted their sight to keep the target in focus. How painstakingly they probed every nook and cranny in the corner of the firmament. It was exactly the same ascension and declination where the shooting star had appeared the time before. They were sure of its coordinates. They didn't see a thing. The whole patch of blue, the magnificent field for wandering meteor, was completely empty. There wasn't a speck, not the shadow of an asteroid, not the tiniest hint. Nothing! Forsyth put in.